In 1973, the democratically elected government of Chile suffered a coup d'etat by part of its own armed forces. The opponents to the new dictatorship were pursued, tortured, exiled, or assassinated. After 17 years of totalitarianism, Chile returned to a democracy in 1990. But despite many investigations, a large quantity of crimes from that period still go unresolved today. This is the story of one of those cases.
Look, this is him. When my father, when he was young, and the first book from 1946, when he starts getting his background as president of the men's school, from early on he was an organizer of sorts. Look here. He left texts from 1943. Texts. This is him when he was 20.
The Diary of Carlos Salazar. Testimonies.
I'm Mrs. Amelia Arredondo Reta. I'm from San Felipe originally, and he was my husband, Carlos Salazar Contreras. We met as little children. He was about 8 years of age, and so was I. He was a neighbor of ours from the neighborhood, let's say. And he'd pick up a cousin of mine, a first cousin, to play. And we would all play together. That's the story. He was very articulate, and he used to speak beautifully. And I think that's what got me in high school, because he had a way with words, which... He wasn't in high school. We were in different high schools, of course, for girls and for boys. And he would go to the girls' school, and with 2 or 3 words, all the girls would fall head over heels for him because he spoke beautifully. He had to move here because his family had moved to Santiago, so he had to come here. I was going to stay there, but that's when he proposed. If we were to continue going out together, it was as married. Otherwise, we would break up, and that's how we went on together.
My name is Carlos Salazar. I'm Carlos Salazar Contreras' son. My old man had a difficult life. He wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. My grandfather was a teacher and came to be the principal of a school in Tacna. My grandmother didn't have a profession. Therefore, when my grandmother became a widower, things were very difficult for him. He was a boarding student, and according to my mother, the situation was very difficult. Very unfortunate. He, from early on, stood out, even in his years as a youngster. In his years as a student, became student president in Aconcagua, president of the boys' high school in Aconcagua, and later on, president of the Literature Academy in 1946. From his early years, he started being a very active organizer. This must have been the year 1946. president of the student body, and member of the secondary student council. The guy loved to play. A chess player. He liked playing chess a lot. This is it. Work that he did. He was a history buff. Avec les compliments du ministre de France. French Embassy Award. Obtained the year 1945 for this research with his work about the importance of the French language.
The truth is that it's he who had his eye on me, because I used to have a lot of dates. But the truth is that it was quite a long, nice relationship. And we got married at the age of 24. He was studying, but he worked, and he was working at one of Santiago's appeal courts.
And he started working as, with the rank, let's say, someone who was just finished only high school, to court, and from then he began studying law at the University of Chile, and take open exams. He wrote several biographical stories from that time, the time in which he was, when he was a member of the judicial system. And at that moment, at this time when he studies and works, he is finally able to become a free agent. But he doesn't leave the judicial system altogether. And the last job he carried out within the system was being a judge of Chanco. He lived in Chanco for a while as civil judge in a junior court where he would deal with all kinds of matters.
He graduated and continued working with another lawyer until he established his own office.
Daughter of mine. Today, Wednesday, October the 5th, 1955. At 12:05, you were born. You come to this world at a difficult moment, but by gosh, every moment is difficult. You are born when spring begins. I hope you always keep it in your smile and spread it to many fields where pain reigns. With you, I die a little, because you, tiny little thing, represent my continuity, and I become just a starting point in a new being.
I'm Liliana Salazar Redondo, daughter of Carlos Salazar Contreras. Even though nobody's born knowing how to be a father, with me, he became a father, let's say. And I enjoyed my father until the age of 18. And exactly until 18. The day they took him away was my birthday, October 5th, 1973. Maybe he was not the best husband in the world, nor the best man in the world. But as a father, he was a great father to me.
When my father was murdered, I was 9 years old, and therefore have only childhood memories of him, which are beautiful memories, which have to do with days in the countryside, outings, playing ball with him, playing, going to the zoo, doing different activities. He was a working man, and on weekends, on Sunday afternoons, he would go out with the family. The guy liked established places like Club de la Unión to, I don't know, a hole in the wall like Las Tejas restaurant. He really liked going out. He was good at having parties, good at having a good time, good at telling jokes.
He liked, let's say, the bohemian life a little, but it was because he liked to stay with his friends, talking, and he would get home a little late. Many times. I'd get up and leave for work, and he would continue at the house with his friends.
He gave himself the gusto or not, let's say, too. He liked pinching my bottom, until tight pants became the fashion, and he couldn't pinch them anymore. I was so embarrassed, though, because he said he would pinch my buttocks downtown, and that at the age of 10 or 12 was somewhat terrifying.
My son has, let's see, I don't think he remembers much about his father. However, physically he looks a lot like him.
Physically, it's like seeing Carlos now, just darker. Although he complains. Carlos has fairer skin and my father was much darker. But it's just like seeing Carlos. Heavier, bigger, wider, let's say.
It's complicated. It's a complicated situation. It's complicated. Because we are two different beings. I'm much more introverted, less outgoing, much less a night owl with all that kind of stuff. I'm more of a homebody, so from time to time there's distance with my father's ways. We are not the same. We don't have the same personality. We don't have the same personality.
As a writer, he was also a bit of a poet. He had some nice verses. He had nice writings.
Shoot, I think he was more of a poet and more of a writer than anything else.
He left a diary that he left for my daughter, which we found at the office that he had downtown as a lawyer. And it's quite beautiful and very touching.
It was pretty shocking to get that book because I got it just the day before we found out that he was dead, that he had been killed. And the amazing thing was that I read it that night. And that night, I saw reflected or summarized in all those pages what he had tried to impress upon me ever since I reasoned.
March 7, 1960. For the first time, you have started going to school. Your first school was a public school. I think I owe you an explanation about this. It's not common for the daughter of a professional, and much less the only daughter, to attend a public school. Nevertheless, that's where I have sent you, as you could be like everyone else. No more, no less.
Well, I met him as a communist. But with time, it seems, well, there was a time that he left politics. He never belonged to a political party, and it was just feelings, let's say.
My father was a communist in his youth. Later on, he joined the Freemasonry. Then he left the lodge. He sent the Masons to hell. They are a bunch of old assholes, he would say. My old man was a socialist. He ended up in the Socialist Party because he used to say that there had to be a big Socialist Party to be able to control the communist. My father in his last 2 years had nothing of communism in him.
There is an incompatibility in being a communist and a Mason. He couldn't have been a communist and a Mason. Forget it. I do have, let's say, because I researched the subject, he was a socialist, but he didn't have political posting to carry out.
November 23rd, 1970. Lilo, it's been years since I have written you. If something happens to me, whatever that might be, I want you to know just one thing. I haven't done anything wrong. The profession forces one to be loyal. And I am a professional who does his duty. Don't let anything change your ideas about the revolution. I have instilled them in you since you were a little girl, and I hope you never stray from them. When your brother is older, I hope you teach him the same, if I can't do it myself. I adore you both.
Mr. Carlos Lopez, how are you? How did you meet my father? And how did you start your professional relationship with him?
Look, I met your dad when he was working at the Second Civil Court. You tell me that he hadn't graduated from law school yet, but it was he who would solve almost everything. Carlos could be consulted about anything, and he always knew a lot, and especially in procedural affairs. I think he was one of the lawyers who knew the most in Santiago. But he never, that I recall, he must have argued a little or not much, but he knew quite a lot. He had many clients. He didn't engage in collecting debts either.
He didn't pursue his debtors.
No. If he had been entrusted with money collection, surely he would have paid it out of his own pocket. He had a perfect relationship with the other lawyers in the office, who were all much older than him. And when these lawyers had problems, many of them consulted Carlos. And can I tell you something? That is not only about Carlos, but it has to do with the two sisters, Daisy Salz and Hilda Salz, people who are not exactly good clients. So I am almost fully convinced that they paid Carlos very little money. But when the military coup took place, Carlos called me and warned me. He said, "Look, there is a strongbox which is in my name. Nothing inside it is mine. It belongs to the Salz sisters." And enough said. Could have easily, with all the problems there were by then, forgotten all about it. But it was the first thing he warned me about. And when I wanted to execute Carlos's will, I had to include it in his estate, the strongbox. We went to open it. I'm telling you, there was a real fortune. Look, some diamonds were like this big. Tons of gold coins, dollars, cash, a big amount. I also asked your mom, and I told her, "Look, Amalia, Carlos told me that none of this was his." Your mom replied, "If Carlito said that, it is so." That gives you an idea of how serious your dad was.
When did you meet him, Uncle?
I met him in 1944, 45, around there. He was studying. He was in 5th grade, and I was in 4th grade, 6th, 5th, something like that. A studious man to boot. I was quite lazy, and he studied. You could tell that he studied.
When you hear about my father, what is the first thing that comes to mind?
An excellent man, an excellent man. No need to tell you how sorry we are. I never thought something like that was going to happen, you know. He was a good politician. He never talked to us about politics, ever. One night we were at the restaurant El Pollo Dorado downtown, and he went on to recite a poem.
No way.
We were drunks as skunks.
You met my dad in the masonry. Why did you both decide to be masons? What is it like to be a mason? Why do it?
I started to get acquainted with the libertarian impulse that the Masons had in Chile, and I also seen that in Mexico. It was a melting pot of wills and libertarian intentions.
How was his behavior like?
Very affable. That is why we connected in these kind of meetings. I used to spend the summer holidays with my family in Ventanas, Quintero. One day I bumped into Carlos there, and he told me he was there to help some fishermen with some with some problems they had concerning their cove and other people. And what I saw in Quintana was a very well-known and loved man. Since he was a lawyer, he was always giving legal assistance to the poor.
When did you meet him? What year?
Look, it was...
He wasn't married yet, was he?
Yes, he had married not long before. He lived in, let me see, so you get an idea about the time. He lived on Cueva Street.
Cuevas, yeah, where I was born.
That's right. I always saw your grandmother there. She liked to play cards. I went to that house twice.
And is it true you wanted to sell him a Jeep?
Right, the Jeep.
That my mom always complained about.
That she didn't want it, but your dad wanted it. He wanted to feel like a spring chicken. A friend of mine introduced me to him, Manuel Chacon and Gregorio Munitis, who's a lifelong friend, and we still are friends. We would always go out with your dad. I would pick him up at the office. I would go with him to do some procedures. Sometimes he would ask me to serve as a witness, all lawyer stuff. I don't know how he got by as a lawyer. If he had 100 clients, 80 was to do the right thing. They were from the slums, people that couldn't afford a legal counselor to deal with certain things that happen in people's lives. And the remaining 20% were clients, whom he still charged little. He would devote himself to do good, to do the right thing. Santiago, October the 19th, 1972. Lilo, I think we're at a turning point. If anything happens, this may be the last thing I write. However, I see everything clearly, with caution, but without fear. If need be, we must give our lives to keep what's been conquered for the good of Chile and the have-nots.
When the military coup broke, we got up very early. It was about 8 in the morning, and the first thing I do is to tell my dad, "You have to drop me off at the teacher's college, because I have to go." So my dad got the car and drove me to college. At 9 in the morning, I was at the college. He came back home. We tried to go to the industrial belts. We tried to go where we at first were supposed to go, and we couldn't. Finally, at around 12 o'clock, we had to part to our homes. I came home at the time. I was going out with a guy whom I had seen for some time. He studied engineering. And I went into panic mode. But Dad, we have to go get him. We have to go get him. We have to get him. My daddy took the car and said, "Let's go get him." We took Jose Domingo Caña Street, and we went towards Avenue Mata, and everyone was coming back. And you saw how like in the demonstrations, everyone was on their way back, and we were going in the opposite direction by car. That was one of the best and biggest lessons of my life, because he said to me, "We're going to fetch Otto. Don't worry. But this morning I dropped you off at the college, and for me you're the most important thing that I have in life, and I left you. Because if you want to be a revolutionary, you're going to have to learn to give up the things you most care about." Nobody could size up the tragedy that came afterwards, not even oneself. No, if you asked me, I couldn't know what was to come. I saw my dad cry like never before. When it became known that Allende had been killed, when they laid siege to the palace, when all this, my dad said, "Well, we haven't killed anyone. We haven't tread on anyone." I don't remember, except when my grandmother died, when I was much younger. I don't remember ever having seen my dad so sad before.
September 20th, 1973. Lilo and Carlitos, I have so much to say. However, for the first time, I feel I can't say anything. Liberty has died, and I wish death upon no one.
He never thought that he was going to be taken away from home, and neither did I. They came to get him because he was Allende's friend, Dr. Salvador Allende, his friend. And they were such good friends that when Allende was president, he offered him several positions. But he never accepted any of them because he always said they were just friends. He wasn't a friend for a position he might be given, but because he was his friend, and that's all.
Allende occasionally offered him to be general counsel of the state bank. So, in more than a list of ministers, he must have appeared as trustworthy. Therefore, having these lists, the military began to decide, well, this guy, why not? My father was a man who, despite having many important clients, businessmen, what do I know, people from Club de la Unión, wealthy people, he had other activities. For example, he was a lawyer of an association of a group of land workers called Tranquil. They were groups, agrarian sectors that had taken over the land as sanctioned by the Agrarian Reform Act. So he defended these groups of peasants.
It looks like, because of what happened to me later, that it was a tip-off from the neighbors.
He was arrested about 10 days after the military coup. In August, it had been my birthday, and I celebrated my birthday with my father. Cool. Everything was fine. The day before his detention, there were many tremors in Santiago, many times at night, and that leaves a mark on you, because I hugged my dad a lot that night. He was my security blanket. Big time.
The evening of the 4th or 5th of October of 1973, there were about 3 tremors, all at the same time. It was an agitated night. At this house, there was always the stupid habit that my mother would go to sleep with my little brother. And that day, seeing that there were so many tremors, I went to sleep with my old man in their bed. And that day, my mom didn't want to wake him up in the morning to drop her off, because he had started to take her to school every day, so it was hard for my dad to get up early. He said he had studied law because he would have never been able to be a milkman. He never got up early, never. And I was sleeping with him at about 8:30, 9 a.m. My mother had left, my brother was in his bed, my old nanny was downstairs, and the bell rang.
Well, the day he was taken away, unfortunately, I was at school. I was working. So the one who knew most about what happened was the nanny we had at the time. She told me they came to the doorstep and rang the bell and put a foot in the door so it wouldn't close.
3 detectives came. Very politely, they didn't do any harm. They were very polite. We got up, they came in, my dad dealt with them, and they tell him that they come for him for being Allende's personal friend and for being a contact, a link to those they were searching for. It was something that spun in my mind for many years. I didn't understand much, but I did understand that he was one of Allende's personal friends. They went upstairs, my dad got dressed. He was in the bathroom when he was getting dressed. Meanwhile, they rummaged his bedroom and mine.
And they checked everything. They checked upstairs, the desk, and they found nothing. Apart from literature and books, there isn't... In their house, there isn't a single gun. There wasn't anything.
My dad left. He left 2 signed checks. He said, "Honey, I'm leaving you 2 signed checks just in case for your mom. My brother hid in the bed. He covered himself under the sheets at the bottom of the bed. And the truth is that we forgot about him. No one remembered. Neither Maria nor I about Carlos, only later.
I just have hazy feelings. I mean, I don't have a feeling that I could tell all the events. There's a kind of traumatic stage.
He had given me for my 18th birthday a driving course. When we walked him out with Maria to the door, we hugged him. I hug him and I tell him, "Dad, should I keep going to driving lessons?" "Of course," he says. "You have to keep living your normal life because life goes on. Don't worry."
And he told us not to worry because he'd be back in the evening.
And he said goodbye to Maria and they took him away. It was the last time I saw him. I never saw him again.
I kept on working, and at night, they told me, they phoned me, and told me he was fine. A man, a policeman, an acquaintance of his, who was at the stadium, told me he was fine and not to worry.
We called all our loyal friends. We found out the next day that he had been taken to the stadium and found out that the previous day he had been taken to an investigation station.
So I kept going to the stadium for 20 days, more or less, waiting for him to come out. Because they called me every day for 5 or 6 days afterwards to go to the stadium. And after that, they never called me again. But I kept going to the stadium to see if he would come out. But no, I waited in vain. He never came out.
My mom had a friend with whom she had worked with for 18 years. She was a Red Cross volunteer and was at the stadium. My mom started to give her things for my dad, but she couldn't find him. So she called all my dad's friends, and they started looking for him. But all this I'm telling you, my dad was taken on October 5th. That week passed until October 11th. On October 11th, there were shots fired at the National Stadium. That we heard from here, obviously. That frightened us a lot. We went to the stadium, and they said that nothing happened.
October 11th is a day in which we heard tons of gunfire at the National Stadium. And if you go through the Redding Commission dossiers, you'll find out that there is a great deal of executions and suicides that day. So my mother heads to the National Stadium like a madwoman, trying to find something out.
But after 15 days, I heard from a workmate of mine. They said he had committed suicide. But the truth, it wasn't like that. No, nobody told me that my husband had died. A colleague who worked with me and was a member of the Red Cross had access to the stadium because she was from the Red Cross. But she didn't tell me. She called a doctor friend to tell him that it appeared like something had happened to my husband. So I started looking for him myself. I went with my daughter to the stadium to look for him, but they didn't let me in. Then I went to hospitals, asked for him there, but he wasn't there either. But some friends of his, a buddy of his, and others, they found him at the morgue. They say that they found him under a heap of bodies, and there he was.
So they brought his belongings the day, I don't remember, it must have been about the 26th or 27th of October. They brought us a torn piece of his suit the one he was wearing the day he left, which I remember perfectly, and they had already recognized him by his fingerprints. And that day we found out my father was dead.
No, I didn't go identify him. His friends and his buddy went to identify him. And then I went to see him at the grave. I didn't get to see him at the cemetery either.
He had been dead for 20 days when they found him. So he wasn't in good condition too. He was swollen, he was decomposed. And my mom didn't see him, even though my mom fought to see him. But it was me who convinced her not to see him. And I didn't even have an inkling of intention to see him. I made a mistake, which I'll just die with it, I guess. Because I was scared to death, why hide it? I said, no, we won't see him, no way. And to make matters worse, we incinerated him. So the corpse cannot even be exhumed. But that's what he wanted. He never wanted to be ant food.
I don't know if it was a mistake. I don't know whether a mistake or not. The fact of pursuing an inquiry or a post-mortem examination, I don't think it would have been of much use. There's other legal ways to prove means of death beyond having the body. It's proof, but it's not necessarily conclusive proof.
My dad is stated in the Reading Commission's dossiers as a victim of human rights abuse, of course, but it appears as a suicide. I have made many attempts when I returned from exile to gather information. I bumped into a lawyer who has now unfortunately died, who was with him and confirmed that he had been tortured. On October 9 and 10th, he had been tortured, had been beaten to a pulp. And a person under these conditions can hardly hang himself in the shower. Besides, my dad was a big man. The shower would have collapsed. At first sight of any rational person, it was difficult that he had committed suicide. The holding cells were crowded. When was he alone?
In the Reddit report, my father appears, and the given versions say, Carlos Salazar, 46 years old, married, 2 children, lawyer, professor of law school at the University of Chile, Socialist Party member. He was a Mason and a personal friend of Allende. Arrested on the 5th of October in the year 1973 at his house by investigation detectives and taken to the National Stadium. He died on October 11th, 1973, cause of death being suffocation by hanging. Having found himself with his rights to freedom suppressed and the precarious conditions in which he was, we are convinced that he committed suicide because he could not stand what he was going through. Who says that? Who said that? There is no testimony of my father's death that is reliable. I even talked to people who were tortured during that time at the National Stadium. Also, none of them say that the conditions were so to commit suicide because they were constantly being watched. They didn't have any privacy.
Since he didn't show up, one thinks that when a person has been arrested, they let you know. Either he's left in or released, always thinking that he was going to be released. About 3 days since he didn't come back, we got worried. I started investigating on my own what might have happened. I didn't know yet that he was at the National Stadium. I did what everybody does. One goes to the hospitals, the jail, I went to the morgue, and no news. And then the phone rings, anonymously. And they tell me that Carlos is in the National Stadium. That is the first time I get an anonymous call. I took some steps here and there with friends, finding out how to get there and know what happened. 2 or 3 days had passed. I don't remember quite well those passing days. I get another call from the same anonymous person and says, "Stop looking." And then he calls me by name, Carlos. Don't look any farther because he was killed at the stadium. Then I went to the morgue more often looking for him. I went there every day. I left home at 8 o'clock in the morning every day. There were 50, 30 corpses that came in every day, and the next morning, they weren't there anymore. They had been taken away. I get the impression that they are in the cemetery patio out front because they were taken and buried there. Your father was there all the time. The fact I couldn't find it out was something else, since every day I left in the afternoon and by morning they had already changed. But the bottom at the bottom remained at the bottom. I found him, his hand was visible, and I saw that his hairs were long, the hairs on his fingers. And that had always made an impression on me because he had a lot of hair there. Hey, let's take out the people from the top. I think he might be there, due to his hand. And they showed him to us. Of course, he was unrecognizable. I couldn't say it was him, but the detail in his shirt. Once I went with him, left him at a house where they sell. It's Casa Garcia, which was a store. He said, I'm going to buy some shirts because I'm running out of shirts. I'm telling this because I made a joke. I told him, this is where old people dress. This is where old people dress. Look where you're buying shirts. So we moved that from the top. He had no clothes on. He was completely nude. But when we removed more people, and he was freed, we noticed that his clothes were tied to one of his legs, his right leg. So it was when I saw his shirt, I said, Casa Garcia, the place where I had taken him to. I brought in the people that identified the coroners, and they took some fingerprints. Later, I went back with them to the register's office, and we checked in the little boxes, and they used then, now everything is modern, there are computers. We took the little boxes and it said Carlos Salazar Contreras, both in Angel, 1900 and something, also Dr. Ballesteros, who was there, may he rest in peace now as well, but he helped me with some of those things. I brought Ballesteros in order to believe in injustice, that they were going to say, look at this person, the shocking condition is in, somebody's guilty of this. We're going to find it out. I said that the police would find out, but I didn't know what state we were at. I had no idea what it would be like. We thought this was going to be a temporary. It's the same as I thought like firefighters that would put out the fire and then leave. But they stayed. They stayed, doing barbarities. First of all, a person who is horribly tortured because they did it. They beat him to a pulp. It's impossible that he could have grabbed a rope and hung himself because he was completely. They dragged him. Then he runs into a friend who was at the stadium and he saw he was being treated. Ramiro Zapata. He said he was with Carlos. He said he was with Catito. The day before we spoke, and then he was called. He then figured out why you were called. If you were called, you were tortured. And then he didn't see him again. He had always seen him in the morning when the two of them were together. He never saw him again. So it means that when they took him and killed him.
What did he have in his body?
Oof, look, from his knees upwards, you get the picture. He was beaten badly. You could tell from the blows that he had in this part of his body. Over here, the jawbone. It's like he had given him a blow with the butt of a gun. Then he had... It's hard to say this. Forgive me. But you're asking me.
No, don't worry. Go on.
They hit him. I remember that one of his ears was completely destroyed, which confirms that he couldn't have hung himself. These parts of his body, the head, would join the shoulder. That says it all. Here, all this part was just it was flat. He was already in, I'm crudely telling you, in state of decay. So it was quite impossible to recognize him.
Moreover, he was under corpses.
And underneath, he was flat, completely flat. He was like that bench with no back. They said they had committed suicide with a belt. With a belt, it's impossible, even less.
Sitting on the toilet.
Right. No, it's impossible. He didn't commit suicide. He was hung by someone else. That is the truth. As I said, I kept these things to myself. I never wanted to tell them not to hurt your family. Now that you're ready, I dare say it.
I was touched, of course, by Carlos's death. And I painted a still life. Still life of 40 by 60, and then to personify the drama and the tragedy, I painted a sort of flower pot. A flower pot with roots made of thorns. And next to these thorny roots, there's a skull. A skull fully skinned. The shoulder blade is a very dramatic black and yellow composition.
The support that holds the base is not an ordinary one, but it's a support made from El Mercurio newspaper, the obituary from El Mercurio.
Yes. In this way, I managed to protest and pay tribute to Carlos.
The first few days, the truth is, I seemed like a sleepwalker. It's not that I didn't know what I was doing. The thing is that, as if I was in a movie, as if I wasn't there, like I wasn't a part of it. The first moment I felt, well, it was months in which I lost a lot of weight, I wasn't hungry. But deep sorrow and deep hatred towards soldiers. But I never instilled this hatred in my children. No. That was just mine. I've dreamed of it many times. Yeah. I mean, at the beginning, almost every night. I'd wake up crying every morning. I saw him here, sitting in the living room one day. I came in here. It may have been my imagination, but one time I came in here and I saw him sitting. I saw him again on the street, and some friends of his told me, my husband's clients, they had seen him up north with the same clothing I had seen him with here.
Facing the culprits of this crime, you have a great need for justice. This country didn't do justice as it could have done. But in order to forgive, you need to know who you are forgiving. I don't think there was any type of compensation in a moral way that could be considered compensation. There was acknowledgement by the authorities, but not of who they murdered. A deep hurt that in this country they didn't do what should have been done.
I think justice still hasn't been done.
I hate the guys who killed my dad, and I'll keep on hating them until the day I die. And I think it's fine that I hate them to boot. Otherwise, I would have to fight it. Do you follow me? But I think it's fine that I hate him, because this thing about that we have to be good and respect democracy, I don't buy it. Now, there are still hundreds of families that don't know where their dead are. And they don't know, not because the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, or the cops, they don't know where they are. They do know. And they know what they did. But it continues to be the same state policy, and they continue missing.
I'd like to see a country that's more just in the way that its richness is divided. I'd like that we had more tolerance, more respect.
Well, I dream of a different country. I used to dream of a different country. I used to dream of a country where we would actually be, where we would have the same conditions. Maybe not excellent in lifestyle, but with better conditions for everybody. Not only him, he and a group of people, they left a legacy of consequence, of generosity, of love, because it really is a legacy of love. I don't think they hated. I don't think my dad hated. But they did believe in a better world, and believed in a fairer world, and they believed it consequently.
We are walking very quickly to this wild free trade economy, but it's an old idea. It's an old idea that started with Smith, and it's not the truth. It's an ideological paradigm that little by little is going to start disappearing. Maybe we won't see it, but our children, our grandchildren, they are going to live in a more solidary world, fairer, more brotherly, more egalitarian, by law of life, by law of history.
I want to die when spring blooms, so that my tired body, peach trees blossom with buds of illusion, and that way my beaten and faithless spirit will have a glimmer of hope in each heart that contemplates the bud and bloom, so that finally he doesn't fear the coming day, because I would only be the train of a thought that sinks itself in the immensity of nothingness.
My name is Carlos Salazar. I'm Carlos Salazar Contreras' son. My old man had a difficult life. He wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. My grandfather was a teacher and came to be the principal of a school in Tacna. My grandmother didn't have a profession. Therefore, when my grandmother became a widower, things were very difficult for him. He was a boarding student, and according to my mother, the situation was very difficult, very unfortunate. He, from early on, stood out, even in his years as a youngster. In his years as a student, became student president in Aconcagua, president of the Boys' High School in Aconcagua, and later on president of the Literature Academy in 1946. From his early years, he started being a very active organizer. This must have been the year 1946. President of the student body and member of the secondary student council. The guy loved to play. A chess player. He liked playing chess a lot. This is it. Work that he did. He was a history buff. Avec les compliments du ministre de France. French Embassy Award. Obtained the year 1945 for this research with his work about the importance of the French language.
In 1973, the democratically elected government of Chile suffered a coup d'etat by part of its own armed forces. The opponents to the new dictatorship were pursued, tortured, exiled, or assassinated. After 17 years of totalitarianism, Chile returned to a democracy in 1990. But despite many investigations, a large quantity of crimes from that period still go unresolved today. This is a story of one of those cases.
Look, this is him. When my father, when he was young, and a first book from 1946, when he starts getting his background as president of the men's school, from early on he was an organizer of sorts. Look here. He left texts from 1943. Texts. This is him when he was 20.
The Diary of Carlos Salazar. Testimonies.
The truth is that it's he who had his eye on me, because I used to have a lot of dates. But the truth is that it was quite a long, nice relationship. And we got married at the age of 24. He was studying, but he worked. And he was working at one of Santiago's appeal courts.
And he started working with the rank, let's say, someone who was just finished only high school, to court, and from then he began studying law at the University of Chile, and take open exams. He wrote several biographical stories from that time, the time in which when he was a member of the judicial system. And at that moment, at this time when he studies and works, he is finally able to become a free agent. But he doesn't leave the judicial system altogether. And the last job he carried out within the system was being a judge of Chanco. He lived in Chanco for a while as civil judge in a junior court where he would deal with all kinds of matters.
He graduated and continued working with another lawyer until he established his own office.
Daughter of mine. Today, Wednesday, October the 5th, 1955. At 12:05, you were born. You come to this world at a difficult moment, but by gosh, every moment is difficult. You were born when spring begins. I hope you always keep it in your smile and spread it to many fields where pain reigns. With you, I die a little, because you, tiny little thing, represent my continuity, and I become just a starting point in a new being.
I'm Liliana Salazar Redondo, daughter of Carlos Salazar Contreras. Even though nobody's born knowing how to be a father, with me, he became a father, let's say. And I enjoyed my father until the age of 18. And exactly until 18. The day they took him away was my birthday, October 5th, 1973. Maybe he was not the best husband in the world, nor the best man in the world. But as a father, he was a great father to me.
When my father was murdered, I was 9 years old, and therefore have only childhood memories of him, which are beautiful memories, which have to do with days in the countryside, outings, playing ball with him, playing, going to the zoo, doing different activities. He was a working man, and on weekends, on Sunday afternoons, he would go out with the family. The guy liked established places like Club de la Unión to...
I'm Mrs. Amelia Arredondo Reta. I'm from San Felipe originally, and he was my husband, Carlos Salazar Contreras. We met as little children. He was about 8 years of age, and so was I. He was a neighbor of ours from the neighborhood, let's say. And he'd pick up a cousin of mine, a first cousin, to play. And we would all play together. That's the story. He was very articulate, and he used to speak beautifully. And I think that's what got me in high school, because he had a way with words, which... He wasn't in high school. We were in different high schools, of course, for girls and for boys. And he would go to the girls' school, and with 2 or 3 words, all the girls would fall head over heels for him because he spoke beautifully. He had to move here because his family had moved to Santiago, so he had to come here. I was going to stay there, but that's when he proposed. If we were to continue going out together, it was as married. Otherwise, we would break up, and that's how we went on together.